Jack and his older sister Annie loved exploring their grandpa's attic. It was a place full of forgotten things and dusty memories. One hot Tuesday afternoon, while looking through an old wooden chest, Annie found something unusual. It was a small, rolled-up piece of paper tied with a faded red ribbon. It looked very old and fragile. She carefully untied the ribbon and unrolled the paper. It was a map. The paper was yellowed with age, and the edges were brittle and cracked. The ink was faded, showing strange symbols and a winding path that seemed to lead nowhere in particular. It was unlike any map they had ever seen before. "What is it?" Jack asked, peering over her shoulder with wide, curious eyes. Annie pointed to a drawing in the corner. It showed a sun with a face, shining down on a city with tall, pointed towers. Below the drawing, there were words written in a language they didn't recognize, but one word was clear: Zahara. The map had a long dotted line that started at a drawing of 3 large rocks and ended at a symbol that looked like a crescent moon. It was a mystery, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Their hearts beat faster with excitement. A secret map! It felt like the beginning of a grand adventure, a real-life treasure hunt. Grandpa saw the map in their hands, and his eyes lit up with a spark of recognition. He explained that it was a legend, a story he had heard as a boy. The map was said to lead to the lost city of Zahara, a town that supposedly vanished into the great desert centuries ago, swallowed by the shifting sands. Most people thought it was just a fairy tale, a story told to children. But Grandpa always wondered if it might be true. He showed them on a modern map where the 3 large rocks were located, deep within a vast empty desert. The challenge was clear, and the call to adventure was too strong to ignore. Jack and Annie knew what they had to do. They gathered their supplies with a sense of purpose. They packed water bottles, compasses, snacks, and, most importantly, the ancient map. Annie carefully placed it inside a plastic sleeve to protect it from the elements. Jack double-checked their small backpacks, making sure they had everything they might need for a long journey into the unknown. The idea of finding a city hidden under the sand was thrilling. It was a secret that had been kept for hundreds of years, and they were the ones who had the key. The dusty old map was no longer just a piece of paper, it was a promise of discovery. The next morning, with the sun just beginning to rise, Jack and Annie stood at the edge of the great desert. Before them stretched an endless ocean of golden sand, with dunes that rose and fell like giant waves. The 3 large rocks from the map stood tall behind them, marking the start of their incredible journey. They took a deep breath of the warm, dry air. The desert was quiet, almost silent, except for the soft whisper of the wind. Following the map's dotted line, they began their walk, their feet sinking into the soft sand with each step. The sun climbed higher in the sky, making the sand glitter like a carpet of diamonds. The journey was more challenging than they had imagined. The sun beat down on them, and the heat made the air shimmer. They had to climb up steep sand dunes, their legs aching with the effort, and then slide down the other side, laughing as the sand sprayed around them. They used their compass to make sure they were always heading in the right direction, just as the map showed. They took frequent breaks to drink water and rest in the small shade provided by a rare, scraggly bush. The desert was vast and empty, and sometimes it felt like they were the only 2 people in the entire world walking toward a secret only they knew. By late afternoon, they faced a new challenge. The wind began to blow harder, picking up sand and swirling it around them. A sandstorm was coming. They quickly found shelter behind a low rock formation, pulling their scarves over their faces to protect themselves from the stinging sand. The world outside their small shelter turned into a blurry, howling chaos of wind and dust. They huddled together, holding onto their backpacks and the precious map. It was scary, but also exciting. They felt like true explorers, facing the dangers of the wild to uncover a hidden secret. The storm was a test, and they were determined to pass it. When the wind finally calmed down and the dust settled, the landscape had changed. The dunes had shifted, creating new hills and valleys of sand. For a moment, they worried they were lost. But Jack, holding the map, pointed toward the horizon. The setting sun was casting long shadows, and in the distance, they could see something strange. It was a shape that didn't look like a natural dune. It was a sharp, pointed tip sticking out of the sand, glowing in the late afternoon light. It looked exactly like the top of one of the towers from the drawing on the map. Their hearts leapt with joy. They had made it. They ran toward the strange shape, their tiredness forgotten. As they got closer, they saw it was not just one tip, but several, poking through the sand like stony fingers reaching for the sky. It was the highest point of the lost city of Zahara. The crescent moon symbol on the map must have represented the shape of the main plaza, now buried deep below. With renewed energy, they began to dig with their hands. The sand was loose and easy to move. Soon, they uncovered the top of a stone archway. It was carved with beautiful patterns of suns and stars, just like the ones on the map. It was the entrance to the city. Squeezing through the archway, they found themselves in a different world. They were standing on a staircase that led down into the darkness. Using their flashlights, they carefully walked down the stone steps. The air grew cooler and smelled of old stone and dust. The stairs opened into a vast open space. They had found the hidden city. It was not a ruin filled with rubble, but a town perfectly preserved under its blanket of sand. Buildings with smooth white walls and domed roofs lined wide sandy streets. It was as if the people had just left yesterday, leaving everything behind for the desert to protect and hide from the outside world. They wandered through the silent streets, their flashlight beams dancing across the walls. The city was built in a large underground cavern, protected from the world above. They saw houses with open doorways, a large marketplace with empty stalls, and tall slender towers that reached up toward the ceiling of sand far above. The silence was deep and profound. It felt like they had stepped back in time. Everything was peaceful, untouched by the centuries that had passed. The sand had acted like a perfect time capsule, keeping the city safe from wind, rain, and the passage of years. It was a breathtaking sight, a secret world all to themselves. In the center of the city, they found a large circular plaza. In the middle of the plaza stood a beautiful fountain, now dry, carved from a single piece of dark stone. The buildings around the plaza were grander, with tall columns and intricate carvings on their walls. It must have been the heart of Zahara, a place where people gathered to talk, trade, and celebrate. Looking up, they could see a faint glimmer of light from the hole they had dug. It was their connection to the world above, but down here, in the quiet, magical city, they felt a million miles away from everything they knew. They had discovered something truly wonderful. Inside one of the larger buildings near the central plaza, they made another amazing discovery. The room was a library, filled with stone shelves. On the shelves were not books made of paper, but hundreds of clay tablets and scrolls. They were covered in the same strange writing they had seen on the map. Jack gently picked up a tablet. It was heavy and cool to the touch. The symbols were carefully carved into the clay. They couldn't read the words, but they understood that they were holding the history of Zahara. These tablets told the stories of the people who lived here, their laws, their poems, and their knowledge of the stars. As they explored further, they found rooms that looked like homes. Inside, they saw simple furniture carved from dark wood, clay pots and bowls still sitting on tables, and woven tapestries hanging on the walls. The colors of the tapestries were faded but still visible, showing scenes of desert life and starry nights. It was incredible to see how people lived so long ago. It made the city feel alive, as if the families who lived here had just stepped out for a moment. Annie imagined children playing in the streets and merchants selling their goods in the market. The city was not just empty buildings, it was filled with the echoes of a lost civilization. The biggest wonder was in the city's tallest tower. Climbing a winding staircase, they reached a room at the very top. It was an observatory. A large circular opening in the ceiling looked up at the sky, and strange metal instruments, now covered in a thin layer of dust, were pointed toward it. The people of Zahara were clearly astronomers who studied the moon and stars. This must be why their city was full of celestial symbols. They had built their lives around the patterns they saw in the night sky. This discovery helped Jack and Annie understand the people of Zahara, their curiosity, and their connection to the universe. As the sun began to set in the world above, casting a golden glow through the opening, Jack and Annie knew it was time to leave. They carefully put everything back where they had found it, wanting to leave the city as peaceful and untouched as it was when they arrived. The adventure had changed them. They had not found gold or jewels, but something far more valuable, a connection to the past. They had walked through a forgotten piece of history. The journey taught them about courage, teamwork, and the incredible wonder of discovery. They left the city with a shared secret, a memory of the silent, beautiful world that slept beneath the sand.